What we brought to you at the top of the hour was that confirmation that there was some concern there was a total ban on Australian beef into the United States. That hasn't happened. It's a 10% tariff, and that's what was just explained there by Anthony Albanese. I want to bring in the Assistant Trade Minister, Tim Ayres, who's been kind enough to join me here in Fairfield this morning in the seat of McMahon. Good to see you. First of all, we knew this was coming. A 10% tariff on beef. Let's concentrate on that for a moment, because Anthony Albanese said, you know, he's just said, we'll give a shout out to the beef producers, particularly in Western Queensland, who are doing it tough at the moment. They've been hit by floods as well. But is there anything material, monetary or otherwise, that you can offer these beef producers in the short term while they try and work this out?
Well, first things first, this is there is no country that's achieved a better result here than Australia. 10% tariffs across the board, we do not support that. That is a bad development for Australia. We've advocated against it, but it is the best position that any country around the world has achieved. I do feel for our beef producers, particularly in Western Queensland, who have been slapped in the face twice, once by the weather, the second time by the American administration. We are immediately allocating money to peak councils, including the National Farmers Federation, to support at $50 million to support our trade diversification efforts. What it'll do is it'll add to what's already going on. If you look at what did Don Farrell start with as a starting proposition as we're facing trade barriers in China, that Australian industry had to diversify our markets and diversify the products we're offering the world. There has been a full court press, Southeast Asia, North Asia, Europe and India, all these very big markets for Australian agriculture. We will add to that to make sure that peak councils are more and more engaged.
So what's $50 million actually do? Because in a cost of living crisis, taxpayers will be wondering, $50 million is a lot to give to these peak organisations. What does that money actually do?
It'll support capacity, it'll support participation, it'll support developing capacity to engage in and market in these areas. So that's a really important part of the Albanese government's response this morning. The response is a very far-reaching trade response announced by Anthony Albanese this morning.
What's far-reaching about it?
$1 billion additional to the National Reconstruction Fund for zero-interest loans for firms that are seeking to extend their market diversification efforts. That is a very big commitment to support Australian manufacturers in particular. Local content announcements, that means Australian manufacturers will be front of the queue. So companies like Osrio, not too far from here, that make Australian steel, will be in the front of the queue for Australian projects. That supports the local steel industry, local aluminium industry, local manufacturing. We're putting them first for big Australian government contracts, and strengthening our anti-dumping regime is absolutely critical.
Okay, yeah, anti-dumping is a big one, absolutely, because it's not just the direct effect on Australia, of course, it's the effect of the region, what happens in China, whether we have those dumping of products here as well. The other thing to consider here is what Australia's response medium-long term is. Is there a risk, as you say, you know, you're putting local manufacturers at the front of all of these projects, do we risk becoming too protectionist as well, an overreaction to what Trump's doing?
That's why, if you look at the whole term of this government, our Future Made in Australia approach anticipated further trade disruption like this, making sure that we're taking a smart approach to making sure that we're in areas like critical minerals processing. You saw again this morning another big announcement there, Critical Minerals Reserve. Details will be fleshed out for the public over the course of the coming weeks. But smart action to back Australian industry now, but also to set the Australian economy up for the future. The contrast is Peter Dutton, who's opposed all of these measures along the way. It's about time this bloke actually backed the Australian interest. He's opposed Future Made in Australia. So he says he will cut all of those programs. As an opposition leader, first-term opposition leader, he is the riskiest proposition we've seen in Australian politics so far.
Why?
Sovereign risk. All these tens of billions of dollars of commitments that companies are making to manufacturing in Australia, he is proposing to remove the incentives that are bringing them here in the first place. That will cripple our manufacturing sector in the future.
But what you're doing as well, Anthony Albanese was asked a direct question about this yesterday, and that was, what are you doing that's, you know, that's actually economy-wide good for lifting the standard of living. You've got these subsidies. They're band-aid solutions, aren't they? What's the underlying promise to bring up productivity, make manufacturing cheaper, and at the centre of that, Tim Ayres, you know what I'm going to say, because we're standing here in the middle of the Energy Minister's electorate in McMahon, energy. I mean, $275. You promised that would come down 3 years ago.
Let's stick with the economy-wide measures.
Sure, but the energy is the economy. It's a big part of that for every single business on this main street here.
Let me come to energy. I love talking about energy and electricity with you on Sky, but let's just go to Future Made in Australia for a second. That is not a band-aid. A $22.7 billion program to lift the competitiveness of Australian industry. And that's, you know, one of the reasons that we've had falling productivity, the decade's worst falling productivity, is because of a decline in our manufacturing sector. That's where the big gains in productivity are.
The cost of energy the biggest problem there?
Let me come to energy as well.
Investment?
Our future advantage is in low-cost solar and low-cost wind. That is why these big firms are investing in Australia.
It's just not low cost at the moment.
And right now we have to do things like the $2 billion investment in aluminium to secure current production there. Rio Tinto, on the back of that $2 billion investment, invested $2 billion themselves.
Solar is the cheapest form of energy. I accept that in the future it might be, but you still have to make $30 billion worth of investment in rewiring the nation.
Well, we're not going backwards.
Well, we are.
We're not going backwards
because there's been a $1,300 increase in power bills.
Okay, you finish and then I'll deal with this question.
Can you just address that for me, please?
So
look, I thank you for turning up here today, because there's a lot of people in your party that won't do it. But I want to talk about this seriously, because in Western Sydney, that is what each and every single person has spoken about.
So power bills, there's only one party, the government, the Labor Party, offering support for people in terms of their power bills.
Hang on, they've been backed in by a coalition.
Solar and wind. Well, the coalition has said that they opposed all of the previous ones, and now they say, in a sort of quisling accommodation, what does the Liberal Party stand for?
It's recirculating taxpayer funds.
They're against it now,
and
they're
giving
for
it back to them.
They cannot be trusted on these energy questions.
Yep.
Wind and solar today is the most cheap form of energy. Gas is absolutely critical for the sector in terms of peaking capacity. We're moving across these issues pretty fast, Laura. The truth is, big investments in future industrial capacity require a sensible position around securing gas now, but they also require investments in the future competitiveness of Australian industry. That's what Future Made in Australia is. That's why we're seeing interest in Australian iron and Australian steel production. That's why we're seeing the big investments and the intervention in Whyalla to secure the future of that sector. That's why our local content strategy means that firms not too far from here, and in the Illawarra and in Newcastle and in central Queensland, will be at the front of the queue for manufacturing jobs, for manufacturing contracts. This is a big, bold position on Australian industry and Australian trade. It's about time Peter Dutton stood up for Australia and actually addressed the fundamentals of future Australian manufacturing.
There's no big, bold reduction in energy prices as you promised, though.
Yeah, we'll see because of investments.
How long?
Yeah, well, all of these. This is not, this is not something that happens in 5 minutes.
You said at the beginning of the last term.
Well, what we are doing is being honest about what is required. Peter Dutton tells lies every day.
Sorry, Anthony Albanese stood up 3 days ago, and he was asked if he stood by the modelling that he said was the most comprehensive at the time, that said there was going to be a 275 reduction in... and he said, oh, that's not our modelling, it's Reputex's modelling.
It was. Really? There was a war in Ukraine.
You knew about the war. The war had already broken out. Did you expect it to be over in 3 months?
Prices. And today, we have tariffs announced by the United States, the biggest shift in global trade markets.
Right.
And today is not the day, with respect, to be talking about electricity prices. Every day of the campaign, we're happy to talk about them. But today is the biggest movement in global trade policy in our lifetimes. And the Australian government has got Australia set up for the future. The outcome that we got today was not a foregone conclusion. We absolutely oppose the outcome today, but no country achieved better than Australia. It was not a foregone conclusion. It's a response to our direct full court press engagement with the United States.
Is it Greg Norman?
And it is a very good outcome. We will continue to work on it. But the point of the Prime Minister's announcement today is we are going to make sure we continue to build on the work that we've done to make the Australian economy more resilient, more self-sufficient, with more industrial diversification and more good jobs in manufacturing in regional areas. That's the position that Australia needs to be in, dealing with those cost of living challenges now, dealing with the bilateral questions with the United States. But as you say, the second round effects of this are profound, and we need to make Australia stronger, not weaker. And Peter Dutton needs to say where he stands on this big government intervention to support Australian industry.
Okay.
Wandering around the country telling people to pull their socks up and talking Australian manufacturing down, which is what this bloke has done, doesn't actually make Australia stronger for the future.
No, I think there's a lot of cynical people at the moment about both sides. Would you agree?
No, this is a government that has got hope and optimism and determination for Australia's future, and I think that's where Australian people are. They don't want political leaders wandering around talking the country down, saying that we're not competitive.
About where things are
Angus
going.
Taylor, before he went into Parliament, was advocating to the Australian aluminium sector that they should close down in Australia and open up in China.
Before he went into
Parliament.
ago.
That's what his position. At least he's consistent, because that's what he's trying to achieve
20 years ago.
That's what he's trying to achieve now. The nuclear reactor plan forces Australian manufacturing to close down. Their lack of guts and capacity in terms of these big trade questions would diminish Australia even further, and their lack of ambition for Australia and their opposition to the Future Made in Australia program weakens Australian industry in the future. At least Australians know that the Albanese government's actually on Australia's side.